What's up, you guys? Welcome back to another video of APUSH Explained. Today we'll be discussing the American imperialism, mostly between 1820 and onwards. So first off, we have a list of everything that I'm going to be talking about today. Okay, so first we're going to start with the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, which basically states that any kind of aggression towards South American countries is an act of aggression on America. This was basically created in an attempt to prevent all European nations from having any affairs with South America. However, the Monroe Doctrine did respect all formerly established colonies. One of the most ironic things at this time of the passing of this was that basically America was bluffing, especially since its navy was extremely weak. However, it did have its big daddy Great Britain there to back it up. Britain was happy to help America enforce this rule since it didn't want any other European nations setting up colonies in South America like it had done. This is just a cool photo I found of the Royal Fleet of Great Britain at the time of 1780. Next up, we've got Hawaii. In 1875, the government passed a reciprocity treaty which stated that the US could trade sugar with the Kingdom of Hawaii. This resulted in several wealthy Americans investing into sugar plantations in Hawaii. These wealthy investors eventually forced the King of Hawaii to sign a new constitution, the Bayonet Constitution, which is known for its name because the king was forced to sign it or else it'd stick him with a bayonet. The Bayonet Constitution basically stripped the king of most of his powers, and his decisions had to be approved by a committee before being enacted. Then we've got the McKinley Act of 1890, which basically put high taxes on Hawaiian sugar farmers. And out of greed, American sugar farmers, with the help of Ambassador John Stevens, the man who ordered 300 Marines to help overthrow the Queen of Hawaii, successfully conquered the island. After this rebellion, Sanford Dulles became the president of the Republic of Hawaii. Cleveland, who was the president at the time, got triggered because the Marines had been used without his knowing, and he basically withdrew the annexation. However, the American sugar farmers still had power in Hawaii. The next president, President McKinley, who was pro-annexation, ended up signing the Newlands Resolution, which formally annexed Hawaii. Next up, we've got the Spanish-American War. This war started mostly because Americans were horrified by the way that the Spanish were treating the rebellious nation of Cuba, which at the time was under Spain's control. Spanish soldiers were mistreating Cubans and many Americans wanted off. America sent the USS Maine to help assist Americans off the island, and the ship ended up blowing up in the harbor. America, triggered by the loss of its ship, the USS Maine, the treatment of how Cubans were being treated by the Spanish, and by the fact that Spain, a European country, was meddling in the affairs of South America, declared war. This war was an absolute train wreck for Spain. The first part of the war was fought in the Pacific, where the American fleet encountered the Spanish fleets in the coast of the Philippines. This battle was very one-sided, as the US ended up destroying the entire Spanish Pacific fleet, while America only had 7 people get injured with no ships being destroyed. Without any new supplies, the Philippines, under Spanish control, eventually fell. One iconic thing to remember is that Teddy Roosevelt was a part of the Rough Riders, which was a cavalry unit that helped take the Philippines. Shortly after America captured the Philippines, it was time to rescue Cuba. Basically, what happened was America began its invasion of Cuba, which resulted in the retreat of Spanish ships. These ships were caught off guard, and as they were leaving the harbor of Santiago Bay, were destroyed by the modern battleship fleet of the US. Think about this. Metal ships fighting wooden Spanish frigates. It was obviously one-sided. Spain, after seeing that it had just gotten its butt kicked, signed the Treaty of Paris, which resulted in it ceding Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the US, and it released Cuba. In exchange for all of that, America ended up paying $20 million to Spain. So after Cuba was released from Spain, America set up a military government in Cuba. The Platt Amendment was passed, which severely limited Cuban independence. This was to prevent Cuba from getting loans from other countries, thus starting new conflicts. The US then did a whole bunch of experiments with diseases in Cuba. Next up, we have the Philippines. After they were ceded to the US, America was undecided as to whether or not the Filipino population deserved full American citizenship. This was eventually settled in the Insular Cases, also known as the Island Cases, which basically stated that the island states will not get the US citizenship rights. This was after Hawaii was annexed, by the way. Anyways, the Filipinos eventually rebelled. After a long and bloody war of guerrilla warfare, we eventually let them have their independence. Here is a photo of modern-day South America. The nation of Guyana was I don't actually know how to say this name, guys. But anyways, the nation of Guyana, the dark red one, at the time was a part of the British colony, Ghana. I'm going to call it Ghana. Anyways, So Venezuela was kind of triggered, and that's basically because Britain Ghana began encroaching on Venezuela's borders, and Venezuela basically appealed to the US to stop it. However, the US didn't really care too much because it was a colony that was settled before the Monroe Doctrine had already been established. After a while of pleading, America finally intervened and basically threatened war to Great Britain if it didn't stop its colony, and Britain agreed. Then America decided to settle the issue, and it basically drew a new boundary which gave the colony of British Ghana most of the disputed land, so that it would stop trying to encroach on Venezuela's border. Next up, we've got Panama, which was formed out of Colombia. How did this happen, you ask? Well, we offered Colombia a lot of money just so that we could build the Panama Canal, and they kept refusing, so instead we helped the now nation of Panama rebel from Colombia. Not only did we help Panama rebel, but we also ended up giving them a crap ton of money. Anyways, the canal was built without the help of the British, which at the time was to be done until we signed the I Ponsfot Treaty. I honestly don't know how to say that either. Anyways, it basically nullified the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty so that the US could build the canal without the British. Next up, we head over to Asia. This is because the Russo-Japanese War was getting started. In 1904, Russia wanted some Chinese ports which were under Japan's area of influence. This pissed off Japan, and they ended up sneak attacking Russia. This battle was very decisive for Japan as they destroyed pretty much the entire Russian fleet at Port Arthur. However, the rest of the war was not. Both sides ended up taking massive casualties, and Russia finally peaced out, giving up its claims to Korea. This resulted in Japan gaining Korea and gaining influence over the Manchurian region of China. This terrified the West. The idea that an Asian power actually beat Russia, a Western power, was terrifying. This resulted in a massive panic known as the Yellow Peril, which has a slightly racist name. Anyways, the idea of the Yellow Peril came about when masses of Asian refugees began dispersing across the world in an attempt to get away from the war. This resulted in an anti-Asian sentiment which basically pictured Asians, or yellow people, as threatening people who were going to move to your country, kill your families, and steal your jobs. Anyways, there was a whole lot of beef going on between Japan and America after they both started gaining more and more influence in the Pacific, especially since Americans were being racist towards yellow people, which at the time included the Japanese. The Gentleman's Agreement was eventually signed, which helped fix this issue a little bit, however relations were still soured. The Root-Takahira Agreement was also established at the time between Japan and America, which states that both countries would respect each other's Pacific territories. However, we all know that Japan ended up breaking its territory later on down the road. Hint hint, Pearl Harbor. Here is a map of China at the time showing you guys all the spheres of influence. Don't worry, you guys will see it later on. At the height of the Yellow Peril, America passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which basically suspended immigration of Chinese laborers to America for 10 years. Once again, this is a map of the spheres of influence in China. The spheres of influence literally enabled one country to command all trade in that part of China and shut all other countries out. This resulted in China getting exploited and America getting pissed. The result of this is America enacting the open door policy, which basically stated that we weren't going to respect any country's claim to full power over a specific trade node, most notably the resource-rich China. This opened up trade with China and marked the end of the spheres of influence. Next up, we have the Boxer Rebellion, which basically devastated China. What happened was a bunch of young Chinese nationalists got tired of white Christians attempting to convert all of China, and so they started a bunch of riots all over China, which was basically unable to stop them. These riots pissed off all predominantly white nations that were involved with China, and so they all decided to form a multinational army, which was paid for by China, to put down the rebellion. China was forced to pay a whopping $333 million bill for the damages, and this really crippled China at the time.
Let's say China. 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 You go over to China. China.
Anyways, guys, moving on. Next up, we have the Roosevelt Corollary, which was passed in 1904 and gave America the right to intervene in its hemisphere to keep foreign countries out of South America. It was basically the Monroe Doctrine 2.0, except this time America could defend its statement. Although I don't know from my own personal accounts, it was said that Roosevelt once said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." His big stick, of course, was the US Navy. Roosevelt ended up sending his big ol' stick out on a voyage across the world to showcase America's strength, and it was known as the Great White Fleet. which isn't so white in this picture. But anyways guys, that's all for this video. I spent a lot of time gathering this information, and if you enjoyed it, please be sure to click the like button and subscribe down below, and show me some love in those comments. Anyways, adios mis amigos.